The dusty wind blew through the small frontier town of Red Willow, carrying with it the scent of dried sagebrush and the faint tang of smoke from the evening fires. Clara Evans wiped the sweat from her brow as she locked the schoolhouse door. Behind her, teaching the children of settlers had become her calling. But today, an uneasy feeling gnawed at her, a shadow, darker than the usual prairie twilight. For days, whispers had slithered through the streets like snakes. She'd heard rumors about a missing silver locket, a family heirloom belonging to Mrs. Hargrove, one of the wealthier women in town. Clara barely knew the family, but the gossip claimed the precious item had vanished from the Hargrove home during a recent town gathering, and suspicion had somehow fallen on her. She tried to ignore the venom in the townsfolk's eyes when she passed by, but it was impossible. At the general store, the clerk barely greeted her. At the church, the congregation's murmurs ceased whenever she entered. That afternoon, the sheriff came to the schoolhouse. His eyes, cold and sharp, bore into her like a hawk surveying prey. "Clara Evans," he said, voice low and grave, "there's been talk. The Hargroves say their silver locket's gone missing, and you were the last to be seen near their home." She shook her head vehemently. "I didn't take anything. I swear on my honor." The sheriff's gaze didn't soften. "We have to bring you in for questioning. If you confess, things'll be easier. Otherwise," his words hung heavy, an unspoken threat of jail or worse. Clara's heart pounded. She had no criminal record, no motive, nothing to hide. Yet the law in Red Willow seemed quick to condemn her. The truth was buried beneath fear, prejudice, and old grudges that simmered just beneath the surface of the town's fragile peace. That night, unable to face the cold stares and whispered accusations, Clara packed what little she had and slipped out under the cover of darkness. The town she'd called home for 3 years became a maze of shadows and silence. As she fled toward the wilderness beyond, the prairie was vast and unforgiving, stretching into rolling hills and tangled thickets. Clara's footsteps faltered as fatigue set in, but the fire of desperation kept her moving forward. Somewhere beyond the brush lay safety, or at least freedom. The moon hung high, casting pale light over the tall grass, as Clara's breath came in ragged gasps. Suddenly, a twig snapped nearby, and she froze, heart leaping into her throat. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man, tall and sinewy, with eyes sharp as a hawk's and skin weathered by the sun. He was dressed in traditional Comanche clothing, his presence commanding yet calm. Clara expected anger or hostility, but instead, he spoke quietly in broken English. "You know, safe in town." She nodded, too stunned to speak. Without another word, the man motioned for her to follow. Trusting this stranger felt like a risk, but it was the only chance she had. As they disappeared into the night, the harsh voices of Red Willow faded behind them, replaced by the eerie whispers of the wilderness. Clara didn't know it yet, but her fate was about to intertwine with that of this Comanche warrior, and together they would seek a justice far different from the law she'd fled. The night air was cool against Clara's flushed skin as she followed the Comanche man deeper into the wilderness. Her mind raced, questions swirling like the smoke from distant campfires. Who was he? Why was he helping her? Would she be safer with him or running alone? The man didn't offer his name at first. He moved silently but purposefully, leading her away from the prying eyes of the town and into the tangled heart of the prairie. Clara's feet ached from hours of hurried walking, and hunger gnawed at her belly, but exhaustion was the most relentless enemy. Stars glittered coldly overhead, and the vast emptiness of the land made Clara feel small and fragile, like a lost child. She thought back to her home, the simple cabin she had built with her own hands, the schoolhouse where she taught children to read and write, and the life she had been so cruelly ripped from. The accusation of theft was a shadow she couldn't outrun. No one believed her. No one cared to seek the truth. When dawn began to break, painting the sky with pale oranges and pinks, Clara stumbled and collapsed near a cluster of scrub oaks. The world tilted, and her strength gave out. She lay there, breath shallow, eyes half closed, as the realization dawned: if she didn't find help soon, she wouldn't survive the wilderness alone. But survival came in the form of the silent watcher who had been following her steps. The Comanche man, whom she now knew as Taka, knelt beside her, pressing a cool hand to her forehead. His gaze was steady and filled with a quiet compassion that felt foreign and comforting. "You weak. Need rest," he said simply, his voice low and steady. Over the next days, Clara stayed in Taka's camp, hidden within the dense thickets. It was a world unlike any she'd known, a community bound by honor, resilience, and a deep connection to the land. The Comanche people moved with a grace that belied their fierce reputation, their eyes sharp for danger, and their hearts guarded yet warm. Though she could speak only broken Comanche and he only broken English, the two found ways to communicate through gestures, shared meals, and the universal language of kindness. Clara learned to gather wild berries and edible roots, to read the signs of animals in the soil and sky, and to appreciate the delicate balance between life and survival. Each lesson was a reminder of her own vulnerability and strength. But beneath the surface of this fragile piece, Clara sensed a tension in Taka. There was pain in his eyes, stories untold. One evening, as they sat around a crackling fire, Taka finally began to speak. "My family. Taken by settlers," he said, voice tight with memories. "False accusations. Lies. Like you." Clara listened, her heart aching for the man who had saved her yet carried his own heavy burden. In the firelight, their shared experiences of betrayal, loss, and the hunger for justice wove an unspoken bond between them. "You not alone," Taka said, looking directly at her. "We both hunted by shadows. Maybe, can fight shadows together." For the first time since her flight from Red Willow, Clara felt a flicker of hope, a promise that justice might be found not in the courts, or the law, but in unexpected alliances and unwavering courage. The Comanche camp was nestled deep within a grove of ancient oaks and cottonwoods, their broad leaves whispering softly in the breeze. To Clara, it felt like another world, a world apart from the rigid order of the town she had fled. Here, life was raw and honest, shaped by the rhythms of nature and the unspoken code of survival. When Clara first awoke in the camp, the morning sun filtered through the tree branches, casting dappled light on the faces of men, women, and children who regarded her with cautious curiosity. Their eyes were sharp but not unkind, their expressions a mixture of wariness and welcome. Taka stood nearby, his face calm but watchful. He had taken it upon himself to protect her, his presence a silent shield against any who might question her place among them. Clara's first days in the camp were marked by a mixture of awe and apprehension. She had grown up hearing stories about the Comanche, stories told with fear and prejudice by settlers, but here, she saw their humanity. She saw mothers tending to children, hunters preparing their weapons, elders sharing wisdom by the fire. Despite the language barrier, Clara found ways to contribute. She helped prepare meals, learning the names of wild herbs and roots from the women who accepted her tentative offers of help. She tended to the children, teaching them simple words and letters from her own language, the same lessons she had once given in the town's schoolhouse. Slowly, the camp's people began to see Clara not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged, at least for now. Taka was the first to bridge the gap between their worlds. His broken English was rough but sincere, and he spoke of the land with reverence and sorrow. He shared fragments of his story of battles lost and loved ones taken by violence, of broken promises and stolen lives. "I fight for my people," he said one evening, gazing into the fire. "But fight also for truth. Lies hurt us all." Clara understood that beneath his stoic exterior, Taka carried the weight of injustice, just as she did. Their bond deepened as they spent hours talking under the stars, exchanging stories of pain and hope. They found solace in shared resilience, each a mirror of the other's struggle. One afternoon, Clara ventured to the edge of the camp, where the forest gave way to the open plains. She watched as Taka and the other warriors practiced their sketch tracking, archery, and silent communication with the land. Their movements were fluid and precise, born of years of tradition and necessity. Clara marveled at their connection to the earth, a stark contrast to the town's rigid laws and judgments. But even in this sanctuary, shadows lingered. Clara knew that her flight from the town was only the beginning, that she would have to confront the lies and fear that had condemned her. Taka sensed it too. "We cannot hide forever," he said quietly one evening. "Your name must be cleared. Justice must come." Clara nodded, determination hardening within her. The wilderness had given her refuge, but it could not protect her from the truth that awaited beyond the trees. Together, they began to plan how to return to Red Willow, how to find the real thief, how to face a town blinded by suspicion. The path ahead was uncertain and dangerous, but Clara no longer felt alone. With Taka by her side, she found the courage to seek the justice that had been denied to her for herself and for the man who had saved her. The fire crackled low, casting long shadows across the earth as Clara and Taka sat in silence. The stars above were brilliant and unblinking, like watchers of old truths and long-held pain. A chill wind rustled the leaves, and Taka wrapped his blanket tighter around his shoulders. Clara sensed something different in him tonight. his posture a little stiffer, his gaze lost not in the trees, but somewhere far beyond them. She waited. Finally, he spoke. I was 10 when they came. Clara looked over, unsure at first, if he was speaking to her or to the night itself. Soldiers, Taka continued. Bluecoats, they ride in like thunder. No warning, no reason. My people were not fighting. Not stealing. Just living. He paused, picking up a stick and drawing shapes in the dirt circles. Lines, and jagged forms that Clara couldn't interpret but felt in her bones were pieces of memory. My mother, she ran with my baby brother. They shot her in the back. His voice didn't waver, but the firelight flickered in his eyes. My father was already dead. Killed months before. Traders said he stole a rifle. He didn't, he traded fair. They didn't care. Clara swallowed hard, unsure what to say. Her throat tightened. The pain in Taka's voice was raw, but not unfamiliar. She had seen injustice, felt it now in her own skin, but nothing like this. Nothing so brutal. What happened after? She asked softly. Taka's jaw clenched. They burned our village, took the horses, took the food, left us to starve. I was one of few who lived. An old man, he took me in, taught me how to survive, how to fight, how to never forget. He glanced at her then, his expression unreadable. You understand now why I do not trust towns. Why I do not trust law. Law is made for those with guns and gold, not for us. Clara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I do, more than ever. She told him then, truly and fully, what had happened in Red Willow, the silver locket, the suspicious glances, the sheriff's threat, the way no one even questioned her innocence. Just as Taka had been punished for an imagined crime, so had she. The same sickness, fear, prejudice, power had poisoned both of their lives, just in different languages. When she finished, Taka nodded once solemnly. Then we are not so different. They sat in silence for a long time, letting the stories settle between them like ancient roots beneath the soil. Something had shifted, an unspoken trust, a bond forged not just in shared struggle but in understanding. Clara saw in Taka not just a rescuer or a warrior, but a man who had been hurt deeply and had still chosen to live with purpose, to fight, for something more than vengeance. He stood, looking out toward the distant hills. We will return, he said, but not to beg. To reveal truth. That is the only way to take back what was stolen. Clara stood beside him, unsure if he meant the locket, her reputation, or something larger, something like dignity, or justice itself. How? She asked. Date came turned to her. We do not fight with fear. We fight with knowledge. With proof. You saw the thief. Yes. Clara shook her head. No. But I think someone did. A boy. Young, he was there that night, hiding behind the well. I don't think anyone noticed him. Taka's eyes narrowed. Then we find him. And we make sure the town sees what they refused to see before. Clara felt the first spark of hope since her world had fallen apart. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As they returned to the camp, the night seemed less oppressive, the wind less cold. She wasn't sure what they would face in Red Willow, but she knew she would not be alone. Taka had shown her what justice could look like, something raw, and real, and born from fire, not just from courts or lawmen. And together, they would find a way to bring the truth into the light. 3 days later, Clara stood on the ridge overlooking Red Willow. The town lay quiet beneath the midday sun, its dusty streets winding between false promises and fading wood. It looked smaller now, less like home, more like a place she had outgrown. Beside her, Taka crouched low, studying the layout like a hunter watching a den of wolves. Too many eyes, he muttered. We go at night. Clara nodded. The idea of returning filled her with dread, but also resolve. She had run once, and it had saved her life. Now she had to face what she left behind, not for forgiveness, but for truth. That evening, under cover of dusk, they entered the town by a back trail, moving like shadows. Taka's presence was a risk, but he insisted on coming. They took your voice once. They won't again. Not while I am here. They first stopped near the old well, the one Clara had mentioned, seeing the boy behind the night of the gathering. It stood near the edge of the Hargrove property, overgrown with vines and forgotten in the corner of town life. Clara scanned the houses nearby. The boy lives in that house, I think, she whispered, pointing to a modest cabin with a chipped blue door. They waited until the sun was fully down before approaching. Taka stayed hidden while Clara knocked lightly. A woman answered, tired eyes, apron dusted with flour. Clara lowered her voice. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to speak with your son, please. The woman's expression shifted to caution, then confusion. They said you ran. That you were guilty. I was innocent, Clara said. And your boy may be the only one who knows the truth. There was a pause, then the door opened slightly wider. She called inside, Thomas, come here. A boy, of about 10 appeared, eyes wide with both recognition and fear. He stepped behind his mother but peeked out at Clara. You were there, weren't you? Clara asked gently. At the Hargroves' house that night. I saw you by the well. Thomas hesitated, looking at his mother, then nodded slowly. Did you see who took the locket? He bit his lip. It wasn't you, he whispered. It was Mr. Rayburn. I saw him take it from the table when nobody was looking. He dropped it in his coat. Clara's heart pounded. Rayburn, a merchant and known drinking partner of Sheriff Tolan. It made sense. He had always looked at her with a sneer, like someone used to having power without being questioned. Would you be willing to tell that to the sheriff? She asked. Thomas looked terrified, but his mother stepped in. He will, she said. He's a good boy, and it's time people learned the truth. Clara thanked them, promising to return the next morning. As they slipped away into the shadows, she found Taka waiting by the edge of town, his face calm. We have what we need, she said. Taka's expression didn't change. Not enough. Words are not always believed. We need proof. Clara hesitated. Rayburn, he keeps his accounts in a ledger. I've seen it behind his desk at the store. If he pawned the locket, or traded it, there might be a record. Taka gave a single nod. Then we get it. That night, they approached the back of Rayburn's store. Taka moved silently, picking the rear lock with a sliver of bone. Inside, the store was dark, filled with sacks of flour, shelves of tools, and the scent of tobacco. Clara crept to the desk. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the leather-bound ledger. Page after page of messy handwriting. Then she saw it. Silver locket, exchanged for trade credit. No receipt, R. Proof. Suddenly, a sound behind them. Footsteps. A lantern flared to life. Rayburn stood in the doorway, pistol in hand. Thought you were gone for good, thief. Taka moved faster than a breath. In one motion, he knocked the pistol aside, grabbed Rayburn's wrist, and shoved him against the wall. We're not here to steal, Clara said, holding up the ledger. We're here to expose the truth. Rayburn's eyes went wide, seeing the open page. That's private property, and this, Clara said, voice rising, is the lie that lets you ruin my name? Taka leaned in close to Rayburn. Tomorrow, we go to the sheriff. You speak, or I do. As they disappeared into the night once more, ledger in hand and truth on their side. Clara knew the final confrontation was coming. And this time, she would not be the one on trial. The next morning dawned over Red Willow with a brittle stillness. The sun peeked through low-hanging clouds, casting pale light on a town that had long preferred shadows over truth. Clara stood in the town square, shoulders squared, heart pounding. Taka was nearby, silent and still, his presence a mountain behind her, and in her hand, the ledger, the key to everything. Word had spread quickly. Clara Evans, the woman thought to have fled in guilt, had returned. Townspeople emerged from shops and homes, gathering slowly, murmuring, pointing. The sheriff arrived last, face pinched, flanked by Rayburn, who looked like he hadn't slept. Clara could see fear in his eyes, buried beneath his arrogance. Sheriff, Tolan stepped forward. You've got nerve showing your face here, Miss Evans, especially after running. I didn't run, Clara said, raising her voice for all to hear. I escaped. From false accusation. From a town too eager to judge. An innocent woman. The crowd stirred. Clara saw familiar faces, students' parents, shopkeepers, churchgoers, many of whom had turned away from her without hesitation. Now they watched her with confusion, uncertainty, perhaps even shame. You want a trial now? Tolan said. You're too late. No, Clara replied, holding up the ledger. I'm here to tell the truth. And to show it. She opened the book to the marked page. This ledger shows that Mr. Rayburn received the Hargroves' silver locket and exchanged it for store credit. No receipt, no record. Just one signature, his own. A ripple passed through the crowd. Rayburn stepped forward, sneering. This is private property. That proves nothing. I also have a witness, Clara said. A child who saw you take the locket at the Hargrove gathering. He hid by the well. He saw you slip it into your coat. Gasps now. The weight of her words cut through the air like a blade. Tolan frowned, glancing toward Rayburn. Is this true? Rayburn's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Taka stepped forward then, tall and silent. The townsfolk shrank back instinctively, their long-conditioned fear of the Comanche thick in the air. He lies, Taka said. He stole, and he let her suffer. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Thomas's voice rang out clear, young, and brave. I saw him do it, just like she said. The sheriff turned sharply, eyes narrowing. You saw it, you're sure? Thomas nodded, and his mother stepped beside him, putting a hand on his shoulder. We believe Clara, she said. It's time you all do, too. A silence fell over the square as the weight of realization settled. Clara stood tall, not as a frightened schoolteacher accused of theft, but as a woman who had fought for the truth and refused to be silenced. Tolan looked between the ledger, the boy, and Rayburn, who was now visibly sweating. You'll come with me, the sheriff said finally to Rayburn. You've got explaining to do. Rayburn's protests were drowned by the murmur of the crowd. Some stared at Clara with guilt, others with admiration. She didn't need apologies, not anymore. The truth had spoken for her, after the sheriff led Rayburn away. Clara stood quietly, the fire in her chest slowly dying down. The townspeople began to disperse, many avoiding her eyes. Taka stepped beside her. Justice, he said simply. She nodded. Not perfect, but better than silence. They walked through the square together. The same dirt roads that once felt like a trap now felt strangely behind her. She had done what she came to do. Later that day, the sheriff returned the locket to the Hargroves and offered Clara a quiet apology. She accepted, not because she forgave the town, but because she was finished letting it own a piece of her soul. By evening, Clara and Taka left Red Willow, the sun setting behind them. She didn't look back. She had come to the town seeking justice. She left with something greater. Her voice. Clara didn't speak much as she and Taka rode westward, away from Red Willow and all it had come to represent. The wind combed through her hair, and the horse's steady rhythm matched the quiet pulse of her heart. She had imagined that vindication would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like shedding a skin that no longer fit, a quiet release rather than a triumphant roar. Beside her, Taka rode with his usual calm, scanning the horizon with eyes that saw deeper than distance. He didn't ask if she planned to return to the town. He already knew the answer. You are free now, he said quietly as the prairie opened wide around them. You choose what comes next. Clara nodded. She wasn't going back. There was nothing left for her in Red Willow. The schoolhouse could hire another teacher. The town could rebuild its conscience. But her path, her true path, lay elsewhere. They traveled for days through golden grasslands, across streams that shimmered in the late summer light. Taka brought her to a camp farther north, nestled beside a riverbank shaded by cottonwoods. It wasn't as large as the last one she'd stayed in, but it felt more permanent, more settled. The people greeted Taka with nods of respect and curious eyes for Clara, but there was no suspicion in their looks. No whispers followed her. No one here knew about the locket or the accusation, and if Taka told them, it was only to explain that she had survived something and stood for truth. Clara began to find rhythm in this new life. She helped prepare food with the women, who began teaching her words in their language and laughed when she tried to repeat them. She fetched water, gathered herbs, and learned to stitch buckskin by firelight. The work was constant, but it was good work, purposeful and honest. She didn't feel like a fugitive here. She didn't feel like an outsider. She felt human. After several weeks, a group of children began following her around the camp, curious about her books and her stories. One evening, Taka brought her a small, worn chalkboard and some charcoal. You still teacher, he said, just new classroom. Clara smiled genuinely. For the first time in what felt like years, she began teaching the children basic English words like sun, water, tree, and friend. In return, they taught her Comanche words. The exchanges were clumsy but joyful. Soon, she was reading aloud at the evening fire, telling stories of distant lands and brave spirits. While the children leaned in wide-eyed. One night, after the children had gone to sleep and the moon hung like a silver coin in the sky, Taka sat beside her by the fire. He was quiet for a long time before speaking. I lost much to lies, he said, but I gained something, too. You. Clara looked into his eyes, weathered by pain, sharpened by survival, and saw the truth of it. Their connection had never needed grand declarations. It had been built on fire, silence, and shared purpose. I wouldn't have made it without you, she said. You did more than survive. he replied. You faced them. That is more than most. The next morning, Clara rose before dawn and walked to the riverbank alone. She pulled the silver locket from the pocket of her coat, the one the sheriff had returned to her after Rayburn's arrest. It was a beautiful thing. Ornate, delicate, useless in practical terms, but it held weight. Not just because it had nearly ruined her life, but because of what it now symbolized. The lie had started with it. The truth had ended with it. She opened it one last time, then let it fall into the river, where the current swept it away without ceremony. She didn't need it anymore. Clara Evans, the accused. The fugitive, the teacher, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had seen the worst in people and chosen not to become it. A woman who had walked through judgment and found herself not in the court of man, but in the care of a people who knew what injustice felt like and had risen anyway. A new path awaited her, and she stepped into it, barefoot and unafraid.